Hello everyone. Not actually the publisher anymore since last week when I sort of retired, but I absolutely was not going to miss this evening. What an exciting day, and congratulations to everybody involved, especially David, of course. And I certainly wasn't going to miss it after all the years it took to get here, at least 8 years in the making. We've worked out, looking back over my emails, but it was worth every moment. As well as the absolute joy of working with David Roberts so closely, We Are Your Children is one of the books that I'm most proud to have published in my career. As you'll see, it is magnificent and it's important. We often talk about books being a labour of love, but that phrase has never been more true than in this case. The time, energy, commitment that David put into the book was exceptional, be it seeking out new stories and people who rarely get noticed, interviewing key players, writing their stories in such an engaging manner, organising the material, which kept growing and growing and growing, and above all, of course, creating the most stunning illustrations, hundreds of them, each one worthy of a lecture in itself, quite honestly. They really are quite brilliant. But of course, it's also a book about love for each other, across the generations, and that really comes through the whole book. It focuses on the first half of the 20th century, particularly in the UK and US, describing the struggle for LGBTQ+ rights and setting current issues in a historical context as a result, that's both useful and fascinating. It's a book for everyone, and everyone will learn about something new and be enraged and encouraged and inspired by turns. Mostly inspired, as we will be now, listening to David and Harriet.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today with multiple award-winning illustrator and author David Roberts to talk about this wonderful book that very literally draws from history. We Are Your Children balances that very tricky line between being informative and funny, informal and accessible, while being incredibly rigorous and serious in its detail too. And as with all of David's work, as we've just heard, it is utterly beautiful. Majestic, I think someone said earlier. We Are Your Children has been in the making for many years, so it's really a thrill that we do get to see it here in the flesh today. We're going to be talking about this wonderful book and David's processes for the next 50 minutes or so, as Becky said, and then we'll take some questions from you to get those questions ready. David.
Yes, hello.
Let's begin at the beginning. Tell me, when did the idea for the book first materialise?
Well, firstly, can I just say hello to everybody here? Thank you so much for coming, and hello to anyone who's watching at home. I know there is at least 2 people because it's my mum and dad, so hello, mum and dad. But yes, back to the question, where did the idea first come from? So if we go to the next slide, I did a book a few years ago, which I did a talk about here called Suffragette, The Battle for Equality, also with Suzanne at Two Hoots. And I never imagined that I would ever write a non-fiction book ever in my life. But I remember speaking to Suzanne and asking, she said to me, is there anything you'd like to do? Well, it's not a question you always get asked. So I thought, well, yes. I said yes, but then I was too scared to tell her what it was. So then I don't know, I think it was because I just didn't believe that I thought, I had already spoken to Christine, my agent, about this. I'd said, I wish someone would write a book about the suffragettes because I'd love to illustrate that. I didn't think I'd be the one writing it. So then when I spoke to Suzanne, I was like, well, no, I'm not a writer. What am I doing suggesting that I would write a book? So I backed off a bit. But the next day, Suzanne contacted me and she said, I can't stop thinking about this idea. What is it? Tell me. So I'd said, well, it's a book about the women's suffrage movement. And I thought there'd be loads of books out about that. But funnily enough, there wasn't that many, actually, at the time, was there? There was only a few that came out for the anniversary of the vote it was 2018, the 100-year anniversary. Anyway, I'm rambling. But what I was when I was doing that book, I got so excited by this idea of doing this research and this sort of delving into a part of history and finding the people and finding those stories and discovering photographs of these people and what they went through and what they did and how powerful that was. And as I was doing it, I was thinking, there's another book that I think I'd really like to do about a protest, about a sort of a group of people that changed how society viewed them. And I approached Suzanne and I said, I know we've not finished this one, but would you consider doing a book about what I thought was going to be the Gay Liberation Front, the GLF? And Suzanne very graciously said, yes, let's do that, but let's finish Suffragette first. So that's how it came about. It sort of came off the back of Suffragette and the idea of delving into a part of history and really sort of finding stuff out and finding people's stories.
And there was these books behind
Yes.
we're showing now. So there was also something for you. You said yourself you're not a writer,
Yes.
but it's books like this growing up that were sort of also part of your way of imagining or envisaging what this book could look like or what it could be. Is that right?
Yes. So I have dyslexia, so reading for me was really difficult as a child growing up. And I was lucky enough to have a big brother who read to me most nights. He would read me stories and stuff. But we didn't have very many books. We didn't really have picture books because my mum took us to the library every week, so we would take books out, but then we'd give them back. So I don't really remember books from my childhood, apart from these. There was 3 of them. And I think because I found reading difficult, I think it's perhaps why I was drawn to information books, because they're full of drawings. And I've always been a very visual person that has enjoyed reading an illustration, reading a drawing. And the way that the information is given is in sort of small sections of text around these drawings, but you could almost not read it, but you've got a diagram there, or you've got a map that you can look at and things. So these books, these were Christmas presents for me, and I absolutely adored them. The one that I loved the most of all, I can't find anymore. We were looking for it, me and my mum, in the garage when I was last home. But it had it's fun finding out about history, and it had a section in it called What Grandma Used to Wear. And the grandma was an Edwardian child. And my grandma was an Edwardian child. She was born in 1904. So I was and it broke down the clothes it sort of had the child dressed in the clothes, and then it had all the clothes around the child as well. Mm. So you could see how it was all made up, the stockings and the sort of the sash. And I was completely absorbed and fascinated by that sort of detail and finding that out. So I've always loved books about information.
Yeah.
As much as I've loved stories, but I didn't really connect with stories as much, I don't think, as a very young child. I really did connect with information books.
And possibly, I suppose, the roots of your illustrative beginnings was with those sorts of books.
Yeah.
As Suzanne mentioned, this book has taken a year or 8
Yes.
to get to the final stage that we see it today. I believe it's also been through a couple of titles. Can you tell us why you wanted to call it We Are Your Children?
Yeah, so I didn't know what to call it at first. I played around with some ideas. Should I call it queer? Should I call it pride? Should I call it proud? That sort of thing. Didn't really know. But when I was researching stories for the book, I came across a story about a movement that happened in America in the 1970s. I think it was around 1976. And it was the Save Our Children campaign. That's what it was called. And it was run by a group of people that were trying to get anybody who was gay or lesbian removed from their job if their job involved children. So if they were a teacher or a group leader or something, they were trying to sort of get those people taken out of those jobs because they believed that they were recruiting young children to their agenda, their gay agenda. And their campaign was called Save Our Children. So what the gay queer community at the time did was their response was to have placards at the next their next Pride March that said, "We are your children." And it was basically sort of like saying, well, you know, you're saying save our children, but who are you saving them from? Like, you know, we are your children as well. So I just really loved that idea that it was a title that was perhaps not, I don't know if maybe there was, I don't know if the publisher might have, but did you want something more obviously queer? I don't think there was any resistance to it, but it's, yes, we needed a history of LGBT, and we were very careful to say our history, not the history, because it absolutely isn't the history. But yeah, it just felt to me like it was an interesting title that might capture someone's imagination and think, what does that mean? Yeah.
You are, of course, an illustrator. We've established that. Why did you choose this format of illustration to talk about LGBTQ history? Rather than, I don't know, whatever, other paintings or...
Yeah. I think I was, after doing Suffragette and realising those stories into images, I wanted the book to feel accessible to young people. And I know from my own experience that I love books with pictures in. And I feel like often we sort of, as we get older, we take those books away from kids in a way. We're sort of like, oh no, they're too young for you now, books with pictures in. And I was like, I was thinking, well, no, I'd like to do something that feels a bit like a storybook, but that is very much about this sort of giving of information around this topic. So I like the idea that with illustration, you sort of get the opportunity to see things, to see the photographs that exist for the stories that do exist. Some of them don't. There are some stories for which I could find no imagery at all. But to see that and then think, well, if I switch the angle of that, then I can illustrate that scene, but direct the viewer's eye to a particular person, maybe in that illustration, or to read it in a certain way. And that's what I love about illustration within storytelling, as storytelling. And I think as well, it's that idea that to have a book like this for somebody like me, particularly that struggles with reading, it's that idea that the first thing you'll see when you open any of the chapters, the first thing you'll see is an image, a picture. And so you can take your time and look at that picture and let that picture tell you the story that it's telling you. And then when you're ready, you can read the text, and then it comes to life in another way as well with putting those two things together. Because that's basically often what illustration of stories is. It's putting pictures with text, and what do you want to say in the picture, and what do you want to say in the text? And it doesn't necessarily need to be the same thing. It can be something from around the edges of the text that you are picking on, or something that you're trying to get people to notice, you know?
That's one of the sort of joys, I suppose, of the book. Even the stories that I am familiar with, and many of the stories in this book I am very unfamiliar with, which is my bad. I need to get, brush up on my LGBTQ history a lot more than I thought. But there is, you're offering that slightly different perspective. We've got this picture here, which was the sort of, so we can sort of, I'll quickly go back between the two. You can see, this is David's take on this. So
this is the photograph that I found in an absolutely brilliant book that I urge you to read called No Bath But Plenty of Bubbles by Lisa Power. It's out of print, unfortunately, and my paperback copy cost me £90, but it's worth every penny. And I found that picture in her book, and I just loved this idea. It just felt so joyful, this picture. It's like this is 1971, so you can imagine how difficult it might have been to be out and proud, and it might have been the hostility that they might have faced by being so public. But they've got these big, huge paper bags that they've written gay liberation on, and it just seemed joyous to me. And I thought, what a wonderful way to start the book, to bring people in to the book, to have an illustration of it. And I can sort of almost create a cast of characters that they're running in to their liberty. They're running into it. They're running into their liberation. And I just thought it was, plus that was black and white photos, and it just gave me the opportunity to draw these fabulous 70s flares and dresses and hairstyles. And I have to say that I think probably the chapters on the 70s were my favourites, purely for the fashion aspect.
Well, let's get into some technical matters, because you do everything by your hands. There is no AI in this book, people. We're not going to get into that tonight, it's a whole other subject. But tell us a little bit how you kind of physically make the book. What pencils and pens and all that stuff do you use? And tell us a bit about this space here. Yeah, so I do everything as drawings and paintings because I don't understand how you do digital art. Sometimes I think I wish I could do digital art, because then it would make it a little bit, well, in some ways it would make it a bit easier because I could correct all my mistakes easier without actually taking a razor blade and scratching them off the picture to redraw it. But then I sometimes think, but then would I ever finish a picture? Because you're forced to make decisions when you paint, and you're forced to stick with those decisions in a way, because you choose a colour to paint a pair of trousers, and that's what it's going to be, unless you're going to scratch it off with a razor blade. So that's what my space where I work, and I have two sides to my desk. So on one side I have my light box, and that's where I do all my sketching, and I'll sketch things out on layout paper, and then I'll go over and over that. Usually I sketch in a red pencil, and then I draw that up through the light box onto the paper that I use, which is a Arches hot pressed 300-gram paper. So it's quite a heavy paper, but it's not a really thick watercolor paper. So you can see through it when you're tracing. And then on the other side of the table is where I then paint it all up, and I use watercolor, ink, colored pencils, anything really that comes to hand to make the mark or the color, create the color that I'm trying to get. So when I started illustration, I hadn't trained as an illustrator, so I had this idea that you had to be pure about it. So if it was watercolor, it had to be purely watercolor. And then I met John Birmingham and interviewed him, and we talked about how often it looks like whatever it was to hand, he picked up, and one picture might be drawn with a ink line, and then the next drawing might be the same character but drawn with a charcoal line or something. And it was just this wonderful cacophony of mark making and patterns and colours, and it looked like it was coming from all different places. And he freed my mind to think, well, why am I trying to be so purist about it? I can use a pencil line for this if I want to, or a ink line for it if I want to. There's no rules. You make them up as you go along. So I'm a Snoopy bin. Snoopy bin. Music is on or off?
Music is always on, always. It's usually, often it's 6 music in the mornings, and then it will be lots of podcasts. Okay. It's my beloved newsagents, Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, and Lewis.
To that, thank you to you.
Yes. So I like just listening to stuff. And when I was working on the book, a lot of my research came from listening to podcasts, queer stories being told through podcast, making gay history, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at the front and back cover. A bit of audience participation here, if we don't mind. So this is the front cover. You can see. I just wondered if anybody notices anything particular about that front cover, anything that stands out when you look at it, and if not, I'll tell you. But anyone brave enough to shout anything out? No. Well, yeah.
purple ink on the hand.
Oh,
yes,
yes.
there's a purple ink on the hand. That's purple.
Yes, that's from one of the stories inside, the Friday of the Purple Hand, which I could go on and on about, but I'll let you discover it in the
Great
book.
story. The other thing, the purple is a very great. Also, anybody else know? So I guess I'll tell you. Oh, there is another. Okay.
I mean, I noticed the diversity that's included in both the front and back covers, especially in comparison to the posters from years back,
Yeah.
where you do see some people of color maybe in the background, but in the front and back cover, they're very prominent.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk. Well, David will talk us a bit about the other posts at the moment. So the other thing that I think is is very noticeable about the book is there are no rainbow flags. There's no rainbow kind of colours on the book.
Yeah, so it was, perhaps, I don't know how people felt about it, but I was almost sort of quite determined not to sort of bombard the cover with rainbow flags. Not that I've got anything against rainbow flags, and we do put them on the spine. We put the original one and the most recent version of it on the spine. But I just thought a lot of the stories, sometimes I think that if there's too many rainbow flags on a book cover, it feels like it's about Pride March, the Pride March sort of thing. And I thought a lot of the stories that I'm telling were before the rainbow flag was even apparent. And I thought I don't want it to feel like I don't know, I wanted it to sit in the past in a way, the cover. I didn't want it to feel modern. The book ends in the year 2000, apart from a couple of pages at the end. But I was quite keen to end the stories that I was telling in the year 2000. I wanted to focus on the last 50 years of the 20th century. So yeah, controversially, I put no rainbow flags on there.
And as this person pointed out, you also have
Yes.
have lots of diversity in terms of racial diversity, different races and religions, but also in terms of identity as well. We have
Yes.
all sorts of people represented on that cover of the book.
Yes, yeah. This was the second cover that I did for the book. The first cover, it was a cover that I did sort of at the beginning of the book. I hadn't done that much of the book by this point. And I realised that I hadn't really, there wasn't stories about Pride March as such. So I thought, maybe the cover should feel more like a Pride March. So it was a sort of a collection of characters all sort of marching forward. But when I said, what does the team think of the cover? I think Suzanne said to me like, yeah, they like it. And I thought, no, that's not gonna do. So I said, but we have to give them a cover that they'll love because they've got to sell this book. And how are they gonna sell it if they don't love the cover? So I went away, I thought about it for a while, for a long time. I did a lot of sketches of other ideas. And I remembered, I went to an exhibition a few years back of Russian propaganda posters. Can't remember where it was, but I remember going. And so I remembered some posters from that. And I went and looked at them. And what I loved about them, I think this one says something like, everyone who's honest, stand up, or something.
Right.
Stand together, or something. I think it says something like that. If there's a Russian speaker in the room,
No,
do
anyone?
correct me, Chris. No, he's put his head down. But I loved the idea that, don't know what it was trying to say really, but I loved the idea that it felt very strong to me. The physicality of the characters just felt very strong, and I liked the way that they were connecting with each other, with these holding their hands. And then what I loved was the idea that at some point, some like brilliant person has taken these posters on this one, and turned it into a gay poster, which must have been something that they were doing for some sort of like vote for equal marriage or something. I don't know. but it says the gay agenda at the top and love is love and vote yes there. And clearly that's not what they were saying when they made that poster. So I thought, oh, it just made me think about making a cover that would connect characters together from out the scope of the book and have them connected and sort of looking forward and be bold and defiant in a way. And so I started this chain of people, like all holding hands and supporting each other. And I felt sort of like, yeah, that's good. That's about connection. But then I thought, I can't just pretend that the queer movement has been all kumbaya, as they say. There's been conflict too. So I thought, well, on the back cover, let's draw attention to some of the conflict that I've written about in the book as well. And so there's a line of people, and at the top, I'm sort of drawing attention to this bridging of a gap of when the lesbian community and the gay community towards the end of the 70s in certain parts had drifted away from each other. And then gay men were suddenly facing this terrible mystery disease, and they were dying, and no one was taking notice and no one was looking after them. And the lesbian community stepped in to care for many of those men. And so I thought, well, that's a nice bridging of, and then the two characters beneath, I wanted to sort of talk about how in some groups, the lesbian feminist groups have had disagreements with drag, the drag culture, and say that it's demeaning. They believed it was demeaning to women, and I thought, well, I don't want to just gloss over these things. It's all part of the story. So let's have a little bit of discussion happening there. And then at the bottom, I learned from Lisa Power's brilliant book about how the GLF sort of fractured after 3 years. It only lasted 3 years, which is another reason why I had to expand the book. But it sort of, they sort of went their separate ways in a way, the groups of women and the groups of men. And I thought, well, let's do that, but then let's bring it back with a lovely snog at the end, at the bottom there. So yeah, that's what I was trying to do with the cover.
Well, let's have a look a little bit more at how photography has helped inform the book. Tell us about creating the illustrations for Vincent and Joan's story. So the Vincent and Joan's story, which is from the chapter Nothing to be Ashamed of. So we've got the piece here from the paper,
yeah.
Right?
So my research for the book, I started gathering ideas together for stories in 2018, 2019, but my research in earnest, as they say, started at the beginning of 2020. And by that point, I'd decided to expand the book beyond the GLF, to do a British history, but then realized that, oh gosh, I'll need to tell some other stories. I'll expand it to the world, and then was completely overwhelmed and thought, I can't do that. We'll never finish this book ever. Okay. So let's bring it back and draw some boundaries for myself and say, like, okay, well, let's show some American stories alongside the British stories and try and just keep it to that. But then also include a timeline within there where we show the other events that happened throughout the world. And I went to America and did some research, and then I came back to the UK, and then we got lockdown. And so suddenly it was like, oh, how am I going to do my research now? It's all going to have to be online. But then when the lockdown started to ease, I went to Bishopsgate Library, which is an amazing archive of queer history. And me and Chris went, and we spent the whole day there pulling out files. And it was these newspaper headlines that suddenly reminded me, Chris is a little bit younger than me, and so he didn't remember us. I was saying to him, look at these headlines, and it was all, the language that they used was so brutal. It was just, and so sort of demeaning. It was like pufters and lessies, and that would be a headline in a tabloid newspaper. And I remember that. That's what I grew up seeing. And so then when I saw this, when we went a bit further back into the 1950s, and I saw this headline, and I thought, gosh, such a deeply offensive headline, and the article itself is so brutal when you read it. It's so wonderful to think that we don't
really have newspaper articles written like this anymore. I went through and redacted, you'll see all the black marks to take the dead naming away and the misgendering away. But I read this story and I was really captivated by this idea of these two people that were just ordinary people, just an ordinary couple, just living their lives. And they wanted to get married. Well, there's nothing unusual about that. But they were faced with this agenda that was stopping them being married, and they just thought, no, we're not going to take any notice of that. And so they went and got themselves married, and this is the lovely wedding photo of them. They got married no, they didn't get married there. They got married somewhere else. But and then what the newspaper article is telling you about, and that very blurry picture, is they were Vincent, was discovered to be a trans man, and so they were sent to court, and they had got the full weight of the law on them. And it's really, if you read that article, it's really like it says at the end something like, you've tried to put some sort of get married to put some sort of air of respectability around your unnatural relationship. It's really brutal and harsh. So if we go to my illustration, so when I came to illustrate this one, I had a little bit of information. It talked about Joan wearing a green dress, a green coat, and it told about their kind of sort of how broken it made them, this thing, and how they'd spoken at the end of the court case and said something needs to be done for people like us, and how they'd sort of left, and in the photograph you could see all those, how they're sort of getting into this car. And I wanted to imagine a scene of them leaving Greenwich Magistrates Court. And I wanted to add the photograph of their wedding to it, because I wanted it to remind us that all they were doing was this normal thing that people do, ordinary people just do. They just got married, and yet they were subjected to this scrutiny, this sort of hounding by the press, all the eyes on them, the eyes of the cameras. I wanted the cameras to be surrounding them, and I purposely moved them to the bottom of the picture so that it sort of showed the weight of the law. The magistrate's court is written above it. It's the weight of the law pressing them down, but how brilliantly defiant they were in doing what they did. And I don't know what happened to them. The story goes cold after that. They could still be living.
Still be alive, yeah.
Yeah.
What I love about this story is that throughout the book, actually, I have some experience or some knowledge of LGBT history, thankfully. And so I know, there's sort of the names like the Marsha P. Johnsons, the Sylvia Rivieras, Peter Tatchell over here. There's lots of people that have done, and are rightly recognised for their work. But it's the people also like this who just have kind of come along, been extraordinarily brave, and done what they needed to do. And that's what I love, that the book celebrates that.
And they probably didn't think they were doing anything brave.
Yeah.
They just got married.
Yeah.
And why shouldn't they?
Let's go on to Operation Rupert, because I think it would be nice for you to maybe read a bit of this.
Okay.
To give a bit of background.
Yeah.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong, Operation Rupert was set up in response to the Christian right, who were trying to sort of clean up Britain of the gays with a conference called the Festival of Life.
Yes.
So a group of people came together.
I think it was probably the GLF mostly.
It was mostly GLF.
Or maybe it was other groups as well, but definitely the GLF.
So they came together and decided they were going to disrupt this event. They split up into 15 groups.
Yeah.
And went to the conference. And, well, David, you can tell us what happened next.
So this story I found in the book, that brilliant book, No Baths But Plenty of Bubbles, by Lisa Power. And what Lisa had done was, in the 90s, she'd gone out and interviewed the people who were involved in this. And she'd recorded their interviews, and then she just sort of then puts it's like a audio transcript of what they said in the book. So she'll tell you about like the Festival of Light and everything, and then she'll have their voice saying it, but it's all written down. So I discovered that story there and was able to go away and do a little bit more research. And there is some film, I think, of the Festival of Light, but not film of the of what happened. So they decided very early on that they needed to, the Gay Liberation Front decided that they needed to sort of fight back around this idea that they were being blamed for the moral degeneration of the society, queer people. And so they planted a person in the organisation office who was then able to get all the information that was happening and misdirect people. To the coaches all went to the wrong car parks and things like that. They printed hundreds of tickets so they could all go in. And they did this thing, which I just thought was spectacular. They did this kind of rolling protest. So it was like a rolling wave of protest. So they were all numbered. They had 1 to 15, and they all knew what number they were, so they knew when to come in. So when one protest started, that would then dwindle off, and then it would go back to normal for a while, and then the next one would start, and the next one. And it just made the whole thing an absolute shambles. And I'll just read you just a little bit of it.
So mischievous. I love
So
it.
what I was trying to do with the illustration, you said to me before you should put a
I said
marker
put a
in
marker
that.
in.
And
Did I
didn't.
say? And you offered to
Yeah,
paste it.
and I didn't
I think
do
it's
it.
page.
We'll get to it. But what I wanted to do with the artwork was have this feeling of this rolling protest. So it goes across 2 spreads, and I don't know if you can make out, but there's a whole load of mice that were released, and then there's like same-sex kissing, and a group of so-called nuns, which we
And
will
again, you
get
have
to.
this through the book, this idea of, I suppose, movement, of propelling forwards.
Yes.
Like the book opens with the GLF picture, and throughout
Yes.
the book, across pages, we have this sense of momentum.
Yes, that was really important to me, to have that feeling. I did it with Suffragette, where they're running on the cover. I wanted it to be like we're running into freedom and liberty and moving forward, constantly moving forward. It's called a movement, isn't
Yeah.
it? So anyway, I'll read you just a little bit of the story. So it says, oh, I haven't got my glasses. The last thing they wanted was to give the press an excuse to use their homophobic language to report to the country that the GLF protesters were wild, violent, and out of control. Each interruption would happen in stages, one after the other, all carefully timed to create a tidal wave of protest that just kept coming and coming. The intention was to turn the conference into a complete shambles. Central Hall, where it was enormous. Thousands were expected to attend, so the GLF had forged hundreds of tickets, allowing them to flood the hall with protesters. They were instructed to sit scattered about the Central Hall, dressed inconspicuously. The protest started when the rapturous applause for the first speaker mysteriously didn't stop. It just carried on and on, dwindling to a persistent, slow hand clap. Oh, don't you wish you had been there? The festival organisers became very wary that something was amiss. What followed was a wonderful, thunderous display of orchestrated chaos. The pungent stench of stink bombs wafted across the audience as a mischief of white mice scuttled about between their legs. A collection of nuns sat quietly near the front. No one suspected that most of them were men until they swooped onto the stage, dancing the can-can, displaying their hairy legs and big boots. The festival organisers tried in vain to regain control, bringing on their choir to sing hymns loudly in an attempt to drown out the shouts of "gay is good." One lady approached someone she thought was a bishop, complaining that the world was a very sinful place. She was astonished when the bishop replied, "Don't worry, sister, keep right on sinning." That's thanks to Lisa Power for recording those voices, that this story exists in the book.
The sense of humour is so apparent throughout protests, isn't it? Lots of best protests we've seen. I mean, of course, we need action and we need strength, but that sense of humour. And this idea, another thing I love about the book is this idea of how you are looking at events that we know quite intimately, quite well, we'll move on to the period of HIV. Both you and I were very much alive when that came to fruition. I was in my teen years, and even as a gay woman at that time, who wasn't particularly going to be affected by HIV and AIDS, I was aware of the palpable sense of shame that was being particularly felt by gay men, well, massively felt by gay men at that time. As if there wasn't enough shame going around, they piled some more on.
Yes.
So what I love about this, David, is, again, you don't sugarcoat anything in the book. You know, there's a lot of hard looking, you know, you look very carefully at the protests and the seriousness of what's going on. And in this situation, I think you show a lovely tenderness that is very missing from that period of most of the images we see of HIV. Can you tell us about how you sort of selected these images and the picture you painted to show of the time? So
I remember I was born in 1970, so in the early 80s when the stories started to hit the press and everything, I do remember it quite clearly, and how frightening it was, because it seemed so sort of like, oh my goodness, you're discovering something about yourself and your own sexuality, and then you're seeing this kind of like disease that, oh, you're probably gonna get, and you know, the fearfulness surrounding that and the language that was used at the time. The language was so uncaring. It was talking about swilling in cesspits of your own making, and the homosexuality has begun to devour itself, its own children, I think was one statement that was made. And it just felt so uncaring and harsh. And then we're confronted with imagery on television of big tombstones saying, don't die of ignorance and stuff. And then when I was doing this, and I was very keen to not include a story about this in the book, because it was just such a big part, I think, of the queer history. I started to think, well, what should I draw? What am I going to draw? And I found these photographs. Is it Gideon? I can't quite read it. Is it Gideon?
Gideon.
It's this person, Gideon, somebody. I feel terrible because I've not got my glasses on. And Mendel, who had gone into hospitals and taken these photographs of these men who were sick and maybe dying. And what I got from that was just the compassion and the love that is being displayed in those pictures, and how we didn't hear about that so much when you read the stories in the newspaper and you heard about them on the news. And I thought, the picture that I draw for this has to try and capture that sense of love, that this is just ordinary people again who were facing this extraordinary thing that they didn't really probably understand, and they didn't know what was happening, and there was no cure, and they were being shunned by society. And yet look at the people, look at their families around them, all of that compassion. And so if we look at my picture, so what I wanted to do was create an image where I didn't want to shy away from it. So I thought I'm going to look right down on it, right down on that image. And I'd looked at things in the background of those pictures, like there was a card that said love with a heart on it. I think I changed the heart from being the O to the V, but it's to try and include things that were real to those people, and then I'll have to stop.
It's okay. So you've got all of these beautiful details. The woman you wanted to show the woman. The
woman who's I'm imagining is the mother or the grandmother, and is just off to the side, so we don't see we see this love coming from everywhere, from the people around those people.
We also have another way of you looking at photography and images and very iconic imagery of the time. Of course, Princess Diana was a really big part. And actually so interesting, this is actually 1987 when Diana goes to the Middlesex to meet the people that are suffering from HIV and AIDS. 1987 was pretty early on when you think about it, you know. I mean, it was pretty incredible. I'm not here to be a royalist and sing everyone's praises, but I think it was pretty incredible. So we have here this iconic picture, and then we'll go to the picture that you drew, and just tell us a little bit about. So
So yeah, this is an example of when I'm doing this research and I'm going onto YouTube and I'm going on to watch documentaries and I'm trying to get as much research done for this book. The Suffragette was very different because there wasn't things recorded as such. So it was all done from written word. But most of the research I did for this probably came from watching documentaries and films and news footage and video clips of things. And when I came to, I remembered that image of Diana shaking the hands, and I found this story about it, which was all about will she, won't she wear gloves, right? So, you know, how awful. And it was this, she was going to the opening, this ward, Broderick Ward had opened, and she was going to meet the patients and meet the staff on the ward. And so I found, if you go back, Hattie, to the photograph, so I found this photograph, and I thought, well, I don't want to just copy a photograph. And I knew I didn't want to do this one of the shaking of the hand from the back of the head because I just thought, it's too well known. And then I thought this one, and I thought, well, that's perhaps not as well known. But then I discovered more about this story, and in particular about this gentleman called Shane Snape. And it was when I discovered that story that I thought, well, no, I didn't want to set out doing this book by just copying photographs, but I thought I am going to copy this photograph to a degree. But instead of, I made him shake hands with Diana, and I sort of curved the people around and brought their gaze to him so that hopefully when you look at this picture, you're looking at him. And then I added in the background a person peeping through the door, because what had happened that day, the stigma around having HIV or AIDS was just so awful for the people, the patients on the ward, that they all hid when the cameras came in. They didn't want to be on camera. So they all hid in another room. So all the when they filmed the beds, they were all empty. So I wanted to have him there to represent those people that had hidden. And then Shane Snape, to me, became the real story of this moment, because it was brilliant what Diana did. And actually, that picture of her shaking hands broke down barriers and made people feel more comfortable to be able to be around people with HIV, and that they weren't going to catch it and they could touch. And she famously said, which is why the chapter is called Heaven Knows They Need It. She said, you can shake a person's hand, you can hug a person, heaven knows they need it. So, but what happened after this, after these photos were taken, the camera crew went and interviewed the members of staff to ask, how was your experience meeting Princess Diana? And Shane, who was a nurse on the ward, came out as being HIV positive, which was so courageous and so brave to do that. But what he was doing was he was saying, like, I'm a nurse on this ward, but I'm still a valuable person. You can't just brush us all under the carpet. You can't just sort of pretend that we don't exist. I'm here doing this job, taking care of people. And I want to show those people that I'm taking care of. They knew his status. And I just thought that they can continue living their lives. You know, I just thought it was an incredibly powerful moment of the story that never gets told, actually. The focus was all on, will Diana, won't Diana wear gloves? But actually, to me, that was much more powerful moment in the...
And it's wonderful to know that he now has this moment in the book.
Well, very sadly, he died in 1992. But, yeah.
But his memory is commemorated.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah,
I mean, you can find him on YouTube talking to the press, so...
Talking of YouTube, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to this icon. If anyone know who that is? Chris, I know you know. It's Crystal LeBage. And tell us, so we've talked about photography, but I know also documentary and YouTube and things like that have always been really informative. What's going on here and why is this important?
So was trying to watch as many films as I possibly could. So I was watching films like A Long-Time Companion and Philadelphia to get sort of a feeling of a time and what was happening. And then my husband, Chris, is a big fan of drag. And so he found this film called The Queen, and he said, let's watch that on YouTube. And we watched it. And it has this iconic moment at the end. It's a drag pageant competition that happened in 1967, I'm thinking. And at the end, they're giving out the prizes to the different drag queens. And Crystal LeBeija gets third runner-up, which is effectively fourth place, and she walks off stage, and you can tell she is livid. And the camera crew followed her into like the car park or somewhere. I don't know where it's in the corridor or somewhere else in the building, and they were asking, sort of being quite sort of sort of the camera in her face and everything.
Sort of antagonistic.
Antagonistic, yeah. And she turned around and gave what is now a legendary response, which she said, she wasn't looking beautiful, darling. She's not as beautiful as I am. And then they were quizzing her over it and everything. And I just thought, what a wonderful, like how brilliant to feel the feelings that she was just not prepared to just be looked over, because as a black drag artist, she would often find that the prize at that night went to a young white drag queen called Harlow, I think. And she had spent too long sort of missing out on these prizes, and she just thought, no, I'm not having it anymore. And so she gave this response, and I wanted to try and capture it in a way where I didn't want it to feel like the anger was on her. I wanted it to feel like so I put her in this luminous dress that she was wearing for the pageant, but in the bit in the film, she's in a coat at that point. But I put her back in her lovely dress and with her hair skyscraper high. And I thought, I'm going to put like a colour into this picture, and I thought I'm going to use like an orangey red to sort of have a little bit of like a fiery feeling, but I'm going to put it on the other people around her, not her. So she's shining out from that. She's not the one who's the problem. She's sort of shining out from this kind of other thing. I don't, sometimes I maybe get a bit overthinky about the pictures, but I wanted to try and use colour in a particular way in some of the paintings, like the next one as well. This one was about a organisation called I think it's like a club night called Systematic, and it was just all about joyfulness and about how a group of people would get together, mainly I think it was for black women, but I think all women were welcome, and how they would just get together and they'd bring food. And when I read about it, and the party would go on literally all night.
Till 10 in the morning?
10 in the morning. And they'd raise money for other organisations, other queer organisations, and they would bring their children and they'd go into a little creche and they'd dance the night away. And I just thought, how wonderful. I wanted some of the stories in the book to be about joy and to reflect the joy that is was there as well. It's not just all about I think joy as protest in a way, using joy as a form of resistance in a way. That's what I was trying to do. So in this one, I had this idea to just have this splattering, drenching of really deep colour. I used ink, pink and yellows, and a little bit of orange to sort of try and suggest. See, this is why sometimes I wish I worked digitally, because I was trying to suggest the lights in a nightclub that would be shining on people. I don't know if it was that successful, but I enjoyed doing it anyway. Some of the pictures in the book were really hard to paint. Like the man in the bed, and there's other ones. That one was pure joy.
How long would something like that take you to paint?
It took me ages because I had to do that background several times first,
Right.
and then do the illustration on top.
Wow.
So I had to do a background piece and then illustrate on top of it. So did several versions that I wasn't happy with, and of course I couldn't just press click back.
We sadly, neither of us were at Systematic, which I think we'll probably regret for a long time.
Able to go? Actually.
No, well, you would, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I can regret
yes.
it. I would. But we were both around at this period of time. Well, obviously the time of HIV, but also this time of Thatcher, the AIDS quilt, the 6 o'clock news. So these are other images that have been. I shouldn't have skipped ahead a bit there fast, but yeah, these are some of the other images that you were very much.
Yes.
Remembering as part of the process of the book that were very, key memories for you.
Yeah, because I was born in 1970, I lived through a lot of the stories that I'm writing about, and some of them I remembered and some of them I didn't, but there were certain ones that I did have a really clear memory of, like seeing the quilt for the first time, and like seeing the 6 o'clock news. And I didn't see Margaret Thatcher give her infamous speech about the inalienable right to be gay. I had to look up the word inalienable because I'd never heard it before, didn't know what it meant. But I wanted to bring together a collection of images that I used as sort of research, and then I'll skip, because I'm sure we're running out of time, I'll skip forwards quickly. But the one of the quilt, I wanted to do this idea of seeing this quilt laid out, this one. So I did this patchwork illustration, again, trying to sort of be a bit abstract in a way, and using colour. But if you look, there's just one little person standing there looking at one of the quilts, and that's that quilt that is being made by, and that's that person there. So I've imagined, I found a photograph of a family sat around a table sewing a quilt, and I just thought, oh, that's the sort of image I'd want to make. But I wanted to kind of tell a different story from it. So in this story, I wanted to highlight this idea of the loss of this person, that they're celebrating, but they're also feeling the absence. That's why there's an empty chair at the front. And the family gathered there, and we see the words son, brother, uncle, friend, and the grief of the parents. And then I decided that when I was doing the research for the HIV, the stories on HIV, I found stories that were saying that disproportionately Black people and Latino people were disproportionately affected by it. But I was thinking, well, you don't think come across that many stories that of particularly Latin people. Maybe I just haven't looked hard enough, I don't know. But I thought, well, I'll make them family in this picture. I'll have them from, as I imagine that they're from Mexico. So I wrote the words for son, brother, uncle, friend across the bottom of the quilt. And then, shall I just say quickly about the next one? So that one was Margaret Thatcher's speech on the inalienable right to be gay, which was the lead into Clause 28. And I just thought about the idea of when you watch her saying that on the television, and she's talking to a room full of politicians and Conservative members, and I thought, but really, it wasn't going to affect them. It was going to affect the kids that were going to have to grow up through it. And so I thought, I want to make a picture, and by the way, she is great to draw. If anyone writes a children's book about Margaret Thatcher, I'll volunteer to illustrate it. I loved drawing Margaret Thatcher.
What is it, the lines, the hair?
Yeah, she's just a cartoon character, really, isn't she? She was brilliant to draw. But I wanted to sort of have it, she's looking directly at that kid, because this is the kid, this is what was going to happen. These kids were going to be affected by it. They were going to not be able to access information that they should have been able to access that was important for them. And it was going to... So I chose to have it from the back of his head. I like doing pictures from the back of someone's head, because I think as the viewer, it really makes you sort of connect with that character and look into the picture, because they're looking into the picture, which it would have been a very different picture if it was from side to side. I like that aspect of the back of somebody and they lead your gaze in to that picture. Are we running out of time?
Yes, we are. We're going to do one last question and we're going to go to the audience.
Sorry, I do ramble on.
As we know, and we often discuss, the UK is going through an interesting time with LGBT plus rights right now. And when I say interesting, I mean kind of terrible. In 2015, according to the Rainbow Map, which ranks the best and worst European countries on the basis of laws and policies that affect LGBTQ plus people, the best place to live in 2015 was here in the UK, apparently. In 2025, following the recent Supreme Court ruling, among other things, we are currently 22nd in Europe, which is not great. So, but to me, this means that this book really couldn't come at a better time. What was it like for you, David, when you first were given? It's 8 years of love. You can see it's obviously an emotional thing to have made, understandably. A huge amount of work's been put into it. So just take us to that moment when Suzanne delivered the book to you.
Well, we went for lunch and I find I get quite emotional about it, and I don't normally get emotional about my books. I get them and I'm instantly sort of like disappointed with myself and think I could have done better and I should have done better and I'd love to try it again and do something differently, and I put it away and I don't look at it for years sometime. And then I can look at it again and be a bit more forgiving. But I think because this feels like it's not me, it's other people, and I was very determined not to write a book where I give my opinion. I didn't want to give my opinion. I just wanted to collect stories and sort of be more of like a reporter, more journalistic, but in a storytelling and an accessible way for younger people. And I did feel quite emotional. It affected me, and it still does, looking at certain pictures, because I can remember how I felt when I was painting them, and they were hard to paint. And I don't know, I feel sort of, there was relief that it was done, I suppose, and that we'd got to the end of it, and everyone had been so amazing and patient with me, and Becky had done the most brilliant job on the design, and Suzanne had edited it, my terrible English, and with no full stops in sentences and commas and everything. And so it just felt like this big team effort where we'd done it, we did it.
And you made it also for this 12-year-old boy who didn't have something like this at school or in the local library to read. So you've also now created something that hopefully for young people and other people, all people, can go and read and find out about our history and celebrate our history, and also hopefully take influence and inspiration from and go and continue to make history.
You're right. And I don't ever think about who I'm making books for normally when I'm illustrating a picture book. I don't think about the author, what the author wants. It's terrible, isn't it? I'll never get another book again. I don't think about the kid that's reading it. I just think about the story and being true to the story, and how can I represent this story the very best that I can represent it. I've been chosen to represent this story, so I want to do it well and as best as I can, and really, really think about that. But this was different because as I was working on it, I started to realise that the person I was writing it for was really me, aged 12 or 13, and being that kid at school that was getting so horribly bullied with all this homophobic language around me, and not seeing anything like this that I could go away and find and read and feel differently, perhaps, about how I felt about myself and how I felt about the people who had just ordinary people that had done extraordinary things, and how powerful that is. And so I think, maybe there was a bit of that emotion coming out when I first saw the finished book.
Shall we have some questions? Who's got questions? Anybody?
now working. Just like to say thank you so much for your insight on the
creativity to bring this today here with us and to share how amazing it was to make this book. I'm just going to have a couple of online questions and then I'll come to people in the room. I just wanted to read out a message from one of our online participants. Amy says, I just want to thank David for making this book. As a dyslexic queer mother, I can now read it myself and teach my child through your book. This is such an important book. I will be forever grateful for making an accessible book like this. So I just wanted to pass that on. We've had lovely comments from so many people. I'm just scrolling through the questions. Is there a page in the book that was your favourite story to bring to life or illustrate? Was there one that stood out to you?
Oh, gosh. I mean, how can I possibly pick one?
They're all your children, after all.
Yeah. I particularly liked, well, do you know what? I'm going to be pragmatic. Oh, let's say this one.
Oh, yeah.
It was this one, which is about, like, just the joy of disco and dancing and being in a space where you feel safe to be completely yourself and not worry about, just throw your cares away and just dance the night away. And I wanted to do a picture like that represented that sort of freedom. Unfortunately, this idea was that it came at the beginning of this was supposed to be the beginning of the 80s, and so the stories that follow are quite sad in a way, so I wanted to start this decade with something joyful. But as well, because I can't shut up, I do like, I did, when we tried to speak to people and sometimes we couldn't. And so I decided to do voices of the decades. So I think there might be a slide actually. So in trying to include as many people as I possibly could and to include their voices, because again, it's not a book about my opinion or my ideas. It's a book about these people and what they did, and I wanted to hear from them in a way. So there was so many people that I couldn't contact or speak to, but we chose to put them in these sections and have their voices. Unfortunately, what we didn't realise was that you have to get permission from the publication where the quote first appeared. And so we couldn't get all the permissions. So some of them are biographies instead of the quote. And Hattie wrote all of these. This is all down to Hattie. She sourced all of these for me, didn't you?
It was an honour and a joy.
And was there anyone that you were like, oh, I've never come across this person? And
No, I knew them all. Every single one. There are many, many amazing people that I learned about. Shivanda, Dan Choi, but also just the various events.
Yeah.
It's a wealth of information.
Yeah.
Wealth.
So I'll go to one more question online and then I'll come to the room. There are lots of people writing lovely comments online and I can't read them out, but please know I will pass them on to David.
Thank you, the lovely people.
So Liz has said, all of these stories are so powerful and you make them even more so with your engaging illustration. Would you consider yourself a social historian and then happen to communicate through illustration?
Oh, gosh. No. But now that you've said it, maybe I will. But no, I don't. I feel very humble next to these stories. And I feel very humble to the places I found them, because I found them because other people wrote them down or bothered to make a film of somebody or bothered to, like, if you think about, what's the podcast I mentioned earlier?
Making Gay History.
Making Gay History. That's all a collection of interviews that this guy did of these people that he knew were going to die out at some point, and he wanted their voices. So I feel sort of like quite humble in the idea that the only way I was able to do this is because other people have done it before me. And it's allowed me, in a way, to do the thing that I do, which is books for young people. And so I've I hope that I'm bringing these stories to a new generation of people that might not have found them, because they probably wouldn't have been taught them in school in history. And they might discover them, and so it's a legacy that's passed on from the people that originally wrote and recorded and filmed.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just want to repeat one of the comments online for them feeling that hostess absolutely beautiful hair. Also said you're fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Dapo.
Too good not to say. Anyone have any questions? Someone go back there. Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
I'm just curious, from a kind of historical research point of view, with the stories of queer joy, did you find those harder to find compared to, because I feel like there's a lot of material that covers tragedy, understandably. I'm just curious about the balance of the material that you found.
Yeah, you're right. I guess they are harder to find in a way. I was very, very keen to have a balance because I wanted there to be hopefulness and joyfulness, and I didn't want a person reading it to look back and think, gosh, it was all like awful and horrible, and how did people survive? Because people found community, didn't they? And they thrived in those communities. So I guess sometimes you're drawn more to perhaps the tragedy because it's the drama of it in a way that maybe draws you to. But yeah, I think you're right when I think about it. I'm going to go through tonight and count the stories that are joyful compared to the stories that aren't, and see what the balance actually is. But yeah, it perhaps was harder to find them. Or maybe not harder to find them, but harder to recognize them as that I wanted to include them in the book. And so when I realized that I did want those stories in the book, I made sure there were joyful stories and moments and imagery. Thank you for that question.
I think we had a question over here.
Hello. Hi. I have a really specific question, which I hope is okay to ask, about the chapter called The Society of Fools.
Yes.
That really striking illustration with the plant in the foreground. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. People might not have seen it yet, but is there a kind of, what's the meaning behind the plant?
Thank you for your question. When I started the book, I was struck by how these early organisations, they had they wanted to get together, they wanted to find each other, but they had to hide in a way. They had to stay hidden. They couldn't be open. They were afraid to be open. So with the illustrations, the early illustrations, I was sort of trying almost to hide them in a way, to put something in front of them so it wasn't like. So I found a picture of the society. They were called the Society of Fools. They changed their name to the Mattachine Society. And I found a picture of them all sat on a rug in a room, black and white photo. But I thought, I want to tell something else to the story, and I want the image to show a sort of like a barrier, a screen, that they weren't free to be able to sort of be open within society. So I put a plant in front of them, and then for the Daughters of Bilitis, I did them from a distance and had people peeping round a curtain and things to sort of show that kind of need to protect themselves, really, to stay hidden in those very early moments of those movements where they were just starting. Thanks for that question.
I think we've got time for one or two more questions. Anyone else? Oh.
Hi there.
Hi.
I was interested about the edit of the book, when you choose what's going to stay in and which stories from your research you keep in and which ones have to drop to the wayside. Is it just based on the history, or was it sometimes like, oh, I've got a great picture, I know, I really want to illustrate that?
That's a really good question, thank you. And so a lot of the stories would start as a picture that I saw, or a person that I saw in a documentary who I then found out more about. But it would be led from the picture, and I would think, oh yeah, I need to do this. I need to do this story. I need to find out more about it. So sometimes it would be a picture, like for example, the GLF running across the page. That was that picture made me think, I have to have this illustration in the book. This has to exist. But often I would find stories, and the ones that got away, so to speak, the ones that I couldn't really include, usually came down to just not being able to access enough information. And if there was no information, I would try and contact somebody, and was very lucky that some people came back to me and I was able to interview a couple of people, but not that many actually. So if people didn't respond, if we reached out to people and they didn't respond, then, and I couldn't find enough information, then the story would have to, I couldn't have included it because I didn't know enough to write, and I'm not trying to make things up. I'm trying to only report what I'm hearing from somebody else, or finding out from somebody else, or reading. So yeah, there was quite a few actually that didn't progress to being a finished chapter that started off as a chapter.
Okay, I'll just come over to Pam and then Claire.
Thank you, David. You speak so passionately about this, and I feel so emotional hearing you. I've made me cry, you've made me laugh. It's just amazing to hear you speak about this. I'm just really interested in the process of you taking 8 years to work on this project. You sound so passionate about it. I just wonder about the creative process and whether that passion was a constant throughout those 8 years, or was there a creative dip here or there?
Well, thank you, Pam. That's a really interesting question. There was dips because I needed to stop to work on other things, because I was contracted for other books, because it ran so far past the deadline that other books that I'd been contracted for, I had to do. So there would be moments where I would perhaps put it away for 2 or 3 months and not work on it at all. And sometimes it was quite hard to come back to get your mind back into that mindset, because at first I was just so excited by it that I just was so thrilled to be given the privilege of just being allowed to make this book. I was just so thrilled by it. But then it grew, doubled in size along the journey, along the time that it took. Which then meant that it took longer than we thought. And yeah, there were moments where it was hard to pick it back up. But as soon as I'd found my focus again, I was back into it and finding the joy again of illustrating it and writing it. In fact, I found the writing really, really pleasurable. I don't see myself as a writer. I failed English O level. I failed Art A level as well. But I don't see myself as a writer really, but I really enjoyed the writing process and finding the stories and gathering the bits that I thought I need to tell these bits of this story for the person who I think might find the book. But yeah, you're right, there were lulls, and it was difficult to get back in at times.
So, David, as a fellow child of the 70s, I just want to thank you particularly for the pages that really leapt out to my heart and to me. And they are, of course, the HIV and that image around the bed,
Yeah.
and the emotion that hit me of the love of that page.
Yeah.
So there are so many things I could say about it that we could all say. We could have another event devoted to that entry, really, I think. But thank you, because your book is one of the things that has helped to re-educate me as a silly child of the 70s, watching the BBC, reading the news and believing all those negative things were true. And actually, it was a completely different story.
Yes, yeah.
So it's a very big thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel like we could honestly hear you speak for hours, David, without getting bored or need a break. Huge heartfelt thanks to everyone at St Bride Foundation, to Hattie and David for delivering such a fantastic event. Thank you so much for Peter and Uli and everyone behind the scenes of Macmillan and St Bride Foundation for putting on this fantastic event. And I think the last words in the book are, by knowing our past, we can protect our future. And that just sticks with me so much. So thank you for creating something that helps us do that. And just a huge round of applause for your brilliance.
Thank you.